Welcome to Dateline Democracy and Media. My name is Dr. Ryan Broussard. I'm an assistant professor of mass communication at Sam Houston State University, and I'm your host for today. So what is Dateline Democracy and Media? It's a special topics class at Sam Houston State University in which students have the opportunity to interview and meet top journalists and media professionals in various fields. It's a chance for students and professionals to discuss current events, national and world affairs. Students also have the opportunity to ask questions and have a conversation with these top journalists and get some advice on how to get to the point where they are. Hopefully it's beneficial to these students because many of them want to go out and reach the pinnacle of their profession and become top reporters, producers, directors. This program is sponsored by the College of Arts and Media and the Department of Mass Communication at Sam Houston State University. Today's guest is Ann Compton, the esteemed longtime reporter with ABC News, who was the first woman to cover the White House for a national broadcast network and who covered 7 presidential administrations before retiring in 2014 after more than 40 years. Thank you so much for joining us, Ann. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
How are you doing today?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to come. I have visited your campus before. I married a Texan. I have sons and relatives all over the state, and I'm glad all of you survived the week that was last week.
How did your family do? I know you said you had family in Austin and around the state. How are they doing?
Well, it was hard, and a lot of their relatives and in-laws had a great deal of difficulty, but my kids were able to keep their power and actually took in a couple of neighborhood families, including one with a 1-year-old. So they all reached out and helped each other. And I think the repercussions for journalists are going to be remarkable, because look how especially the smallest publications and the online news services were able to keep Texans informed on what was going on. Even though they couldn't get to their newsrooms, they sometimes couldn't get any power except charging their phones and their computers in their own vehicles.
How many times in your career were you in situations like that, without power, having to provide updates, constant updates for the news, for the people? And what's that like for a reporter?
It's incredibly difficult when you know there are people who are hurting. They need to know the information of how to get them help, themselves help, but also what to expect and how to best prepare. Covering the White House, we don't have a lot of incidents up, but we have visited more hurricane sites, tornado devastation, and of course the devastation on September 11th, 20 years ago this year. I will tell you the funniest event that we ever had to go through. I traveled with President George W. Bush to New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and the city was just swamped, and there were so many people stuck in the Astrodome or in the
Superdome.
Inside, but not necessarily safe. And they brought a small group of us reporters and photographers down with the president. Where were we going to stay for the 2 nights we were there? The White House staff found some celebrity, rock star tour buses that rock bands use that have sleeping berths and have electricity and power and everything, even had a shower. And so we slept on a dock in rock star buses, feeling actually very pampered compared to so many through Texas and Louisiana who were really, really hurting.
And you've covered, 10 presidential elections? So you've been on buses with reporters before, going campaign stop to campaign stop to campaign stop. Did that bring back some memories? Or
I'll tell you what really impresses me as I look back. I started covering the White House in 1974. I know, students, that sounds to you like the dark ages, but technically for reporters, it was the dark ages. Did we have cell phones? No, we didn't have fax machines. We didn't have anything other than a pad of paper and a pen and quarters in our pocket to find a payphone, or when we traveled with the president, because we had really good facilities traveling with the president, we would pay hundreds of dollars each network and each newspaper to have landline phones brought into the hotel and set up in the ballroom for us so that we could use phones to call in our stories. So the dark ages from 1974 to what we have now, where I can go anywhere with this computer. This is my laptop. I have not only Wi-Fi, but we were given special connections so that we could boost our signal and actually broadcast video from our not only our laptops, but obviously our phones. And it was only in the last couple of years of my coverage, I was covering Barack Obama, who didn't even have an iPhone. They gave him a BlackBerry. We finally had iPhones where I literally had one when I traveled with President Obama to Oslo when he received the Nobel Prize his first year. They gave me an experimental phone, it was a little cell phone. I dialed the number in our control room and I could go live with my cell phone. That was revolutionary. And you just imagine, as you students go forward, what the technology may be like tomorrow or 2 years from now, or on your second job. It is mind-boggling.
Now, piggybacking off of that, like you just said, the dark ages to now, and the responsibilities that reporters had back then are a lot different than what you have to do now, because journalists are expected to do so much more because of the technology available. Do you think journalists today, does it make their job easier or harder with everything at their fingertips and everything that they're supposed to do pertinent to the job?
The job for reporters in the digital age in the 21st century is not only harder, it is so different than it was back in the late part of the 20th century. Almost all the news we did during my early years at the White House meant spending all day covering the president, listening to him, asking questions at the daily briefing, writing a careful script for which the producers in New York and Washington would look at our words. We would argue about changing the lead or using a different piece of audio. Then I would record my voice 2 or 3 hours before the newscast, and producers back at the office would put it together into a finished product. We didn't do anything live. Everything was packaged and timed down to the minute. Now what we do, and that meant that writing was a skill that was so important that being able to use a minute 20 or a minute 30 to get in all the information you needed about an entire federal budget, you really had to be a wordsmith. And you had the time to rethink, go back over, call your sources again to really polish a spot. Now, in the 21st century, almost all the reporting we do is live. We step up to the camera. We say the president has just spoken to his coronavirus task force, and you can use a soundbite of the president. But everything we do now isn't a matter of carefully writing and crafting your script. It is being able to communicate live in the most efficient and understandable way to an audience now that is accustomed to things happening live, not polished and perfected the way we did in the early spots we did, especially covering the White House.
Do you think the art of writing and writing skillfully, being a wordsmith, as you said, do you think that has kind of gone by the wayside a little bit compared to like what you said when you had a minute 20, a minute 30 to get everything you needed?
Well, for print journalism, which is still alive and struggling, especially magazine or long form articles for the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, for the Atlantic, for the New Yorker, the writers who produce those award-winning pieces, and they go on forever, and they are carefully edited by their news organization. That is where elegant journalistic writing is still an art form. I'm just this week tomorrow, finishing judging a New York Times special award, the Toner Award. And I can tell you some of the writing that has brought the entries up to the tippy top, competing for #1, is the ones that are beautifully and elegantly written. Television is different. Much more of it is the spoken word. So I think journalists in the 21st century have to do both. They have to be able to know words, shape words, choose their words carefully and creatively, but they also need to know how to look into the camera and without a stammer, without a stutter, express an important breaking news story so that the audience who's just listening to it once going by can grasp with clarity everything the reporter is saying. Two different skills.
So going back to your college experience, your formative years, what was your experience like in college, and what skills did they really focus on back then?
When I went to college in Virginia, to Hollins College, now Hollins University, women in this country in large numbers went to women's colleges. The Ivy Leagues were all male only, the service academies, even the University of Virginia, where I later covered politics, the main university was only accepting male undergraduates. It's really appalling when you think of how that excluded a significant portion of the population. So my college, what I saw in college, having gone from a huge high school in suburban Chicago, I went to New Trier High School. There were 1,500 kids in my freshman class, 5,200 in the school. I wanted a smaller, more intimate liberal arts college. And I can tell you that I didn't know what I wanted to do the rest of my life. But I've always been convinced that the broadest liberal arts education, where you can take a number of disciplines, ones that probably hadn't occurred to you before, sample them, either embrace them or move on to something else. Only in your college years will you have the opportunity to sample an incredible array of opportunities, and you may catch your eye that you hadn't thought of, like for me, journalism. And it was not until I graduated from college and the local TV station where I had an internship called and said, "We'd like to offer you $100 a week as a cub reporter." At that instant, the ink began running through my veins.
How important was that internship at that station for your career, for the starting point of your career?
Hollins College, on my junior year in college, started a program where the month of January was for internships only. You didn't have to come to campus. You could if you wanted to, but you had to do a major research project, an internship, or special research to focus on just one thing for an entire month. I worked at the local TV station. There was a very exciting governor's race. The first Republican in 100 years was being elected governor of what had been the cradle of the Confederacy. And I was so fascinated by politics and journalism. I didn't really have much experience in it. That was my junior year. And so I had to work double hard my senior year in the classes I chose to make sure that I not only completed my major, but that I got a little bit more of the political science and the economics. And if I had not had an internship, I call it the golden key to a professional future. It allows you to try something, to really see the profession close up. And I don't think there is any field that is as good as journalism about allowing young interns to come in and really see what it takes to be a beat reporter, a producer, a cameraman, a videographer, and someone whose whole focus is taking what breaking news you see before you and making it into a form where your mom and dad and your uncles and aunts and your little brother can all watch it and understand like that what's important.
And when you had that job at the CBS affiliate in Roanoke, you helped them establish a Capitol News Bureau.
Yes.
What was that like, starting that from scratch?
Well, I didn't know anything about bureaus or I didn't know a whole lot about Virginia politics, but that first Republican governor in 100 years was from Roanoke, and he was now moving to Richmond, and he was going to be a story year round. So they did move me to Richmond, and I had to, the difficulty it produced for a correspondent who's out on the road, I knew that I had to get my interviews, write my story, and put all of that back, and I had to put it on an airplane for a 1-hour flight back to Roanoke, where the film would be processed and edited and assembled for the evening news. And very often what I was covering wouldn't hit the air till the next day. So I had to be careful in what tenses I used, how I explained stories to people so they would understand this has already happened, here's what to look for tomorrow. It was a real mind game on how to take news that's distant from your audience and get it to them. The same trouble that reporters had in Texas covering the deep freeze and the power outage, the same that reporters in Afghanistan, Iraq, Middle East, anywhere in the world have, trying to get really topical breaking news to their audiences back in the United States like that.
And then after several years at CBS, ABC came calling. What was it like making that jump?
Both jobs, both the local TV job, the station that called said $100 a week, they'd never had a woman. The networks were scrambling to get women correspondents. We were really kind of odd ducks. There were almost none of us. And so ABC called me because they'd heard that I was somebody had recommended me, and they saw me on the air in Virginia, and they called and offered me a job. The hard part for me, Dr. Broussard, was not that I was a woman. I could handle that part of it. I was so much younger than all of the other correspondents. When I first went to the White House, Dan Rather was in the CBS booth next to me. I was in the ABC News booth, and the booth here was Tom Brokaw of NBC. Correspondent Bob Pierpoint of CBS had been in Panmunjom when the Korean armistice was signed. Bob Clark of ABC News had been in the motorcade when John Kennedy was shot, and I was in grade school, in high school. So I think the idea that when you're entering on a beat and you're covering a subject, sometimes it's something thrown to you at the last minute. You don't plan for a big Texas freeze or a power outage. You have to stay on your toes. You have to know where to find information quickly. And you have to put it all into perspective of people who are desperate for information. So the leap to the White House was running extra hard to keep up with people who knew the White House and national politics and world history much better than I did.
What was it like jumping into that lion's den with those already established heavyweights literally sitting next to you on a daily basis?
I must tell you, the older correspondents, the established correspondents, could not have been more supportive, kinder, explaining to me sometimes the nitty gritty of, oh, wait, don't get in that car in the motorcade. You need to be in that car. Or what it meant when the president was going to have a press conference versus just a presidential remarks where you didn't get to ask questions. They were incredibly helpful. They were still competitive. They had their stories and their sources, and they weren't sharing those. But I benefited from a wonderful generation of established, famous network correspondents and newspaper reporters who could not have been more supportive and helpful to the new kid, the 27-year-old kid on the block.
Now, speaking of Dan Rather, a Sam Houston State alum, you told me that you lived next to him in Georgetown.
Yeah, I moved. ABC first hired me and took me to New York for a year, which was fabulous. I loved it. And it was an exciting way to get to know the network personnel and to get to know the kind of the network culture. But Richard Nixon resigned. and Dan Rather, of course, was the most prominent of the reporters covering him. I moved to Washington and moved into a little townhouse that I rented in Georgetown, only to have a woman come knock at my door one day asking me to sign a petition. Now, as a journalist, I don't sign petitions for anything. Even, are the Girl Scouts good? Yes, but I still don't sign petitions. This woman said her name was Robin Rather, and her husband was Dan Rather, and they lived in the house behind me, and we shared a driveway. And she proudly announced that she's on the Nixon enemies list. He couldn't be political, she could. And so Dan Rather, who couldn't have been more gracious to me during the years we were crossed paths, that it really made me realize Washington, and any state capital, by the way, if you become a reporter and want to go to the very best markets, a state capital has statewide news as well as local news. It's a national focus as well. I found that Washington was a very small town, and we all got to know each other pretty well. And that made a tremendous impact on how I covered and how I could make sources who would learn to get to know me, who would begin to trust me. One source I covered was a wonderful young aide who traveled the big circles in Washington. He was from Texas. His name was, Pete, your professor is one of the ones that I could not have gotten through covering either the Reagan or the Bush 41 years, if Pete had not been there for me, and a wonderful, wonderful source.
He speaks very highly of you, and he specifically wanted me to ask you about your coverage of the Air Florida Flight 90 in 1982 that struck the 14th Street Bridge over the Potomac. You sprinted in the snow from the White House to the airport. What was that like, running through the snow, sprinting to get there to be first and to report on it?
It was a Friday, and a group of us women reporters, I was now not the only one in Washington, there were 4 or 5 of us, and we had just gotten together. It was a slow day, it was snowing like mad, and nothing going on. So I went and had lunch with these 3, 4 other women reporters, and I got back to the White House, and the television desk called and said, "We know that we never leave the White House uncovered. Anything could happen in the world. We always keep a correspondent at the White House. But Ann, we need you to leave Sam Donaldson sitting right there. And you need to go over the 14th Street Bridge, which is just on the other side of the Washington Monument from the White House." The plane in heavy snow tried taking off, crashed, and we were being told that there were still people on board the plane in the water, and a helicopter was coming to pluck them out of the water. I put on my boots, a producer went with me. We literally ran out of the White House grounds, over the snowy grounds of the National, I guess I waved to Pete in the window as I went out. And we got as far as the bridge where the plane had crashed. And and all we had, the only communications had, was a big heavy thing the size of a brick, a 2-way radio that would relay my voice to the office. It didn't go on the air. And a truck drove by, a painter's or a carpenter's truck, and they slowed down, and we said, "Can you get us up onto the bridge?" The guy said, "Sure, that's the way I'm going." So police were just setting up roadblocks, and I held my radio out of the truck window, waving it as if, "Hey, I'm important, I got to get out here." The police let us through, the truck dropped us off, and I actually, on that radio, back to the ABC headquarters, they put me live on the air with anchor Frank Reynolds, and I described the last flight attendant being picked up out of the water, freezing cold, ice, choppy, icy water, and being taken to the side, and the plane slipping down under the water. It was being in the right place at the right time. And that's what reporters do, never knowing what's going to happen 5 minutes later. One of the things I love and brace myself for in this business is you will never know when you walk into the office in the morning where you will be by the end of the day.
Did you get an adrenaline rush from doing stuff like that? Because reporters talk about it all the time. It's kind of a rush. It's the feeling of breaking that story and reporting on a major story. What can you describe what that's like for people who
That's a really good question. I've never been asked that before. Um, I think there is a rush in that, professionally, I have got to get this done. Sometimes I compare it a little bit to a doctor, a trauma doctor in the emergency room, and a car accident victim comes in. You see it's Tiger Woods and you see his leg mangled. You don't stop and get emotional about it, or have second thoughts about which scalpel do I grab. You have a job to do. You're focused in doing it. I think most often when I have covered moments of crisis, I've gotten through them. I've tried to stay focused. I've tried to stay concentrating on what I needed to do that moment. It's when I step back, the story is filed, the event is over. That's when my hand shakes. That's when I catch my breath. That's when I wonder, was it okay? Did I do it right?
after a while you just kind of go on autopilot a little bit, kind of out of body, and then when you step back and kind of get that 30,000-foot view of everything.
I'll tell you another quick story. Pete Roussel, as the White House Deputy Press Secretary, we were with President Reagan in Augusta, Georgia, and it was a quiet weekend. And Pete was, we were on the trip, and Pete called my hotel room at 2:00 in the morning. There'd been a gun scare with a gunman in a golf pro shop that day, and President Reagan didn't get to finish his golf game, and there were all sorts of things going on. Pete called and said, "Ann, get up, get dressed. We're going back to Washington." I said, "It's Pete, it's 2:00 in the morning." There'd been a gigantic explosion in Beirut. American soldiers, I think it was like 241 of them, had been killed by a terrorist blast. That's the kind of thing where you can't get distracted. You have to just put your mind around it as much as you can and focus on that, and hope that your adrenaline can get you through the next 12 hours with no sleep and rushing back to Washington. That's part and parcel. It's certainly true of journalism. It's true of first responders, of fire trucks crews that head out into unknown calls in the middle of the night. And it's certainly true of so many of the healthcare workers who have coped with COVID over the last, can you believe it? It's now been a full year.
I know. Well, I could keep going, but this is not about me. Let's get the students in. First off, you have questions from Jordan Johnson.
Hi, Ms. Compton.
Hi, Jordan.
Hi, thank you again for meeting with us today. I'll go ahead and start off with my first question. While doing my research on you, one of the things I found most fascinating is that you're actually the lone White House press pool reporter in the classroom with President Bush while he learned about the attacks on 9/11. Can you describe that moment for us and what you were feeling?
I can. And I'll tell you how it worked as well, Jordan, because when we go on a trip with the president, they're usually 40, 50, 60, on a foreign trip, maybe 100 reporters. But when he goes into a small classroom to see children to talk about education, we can't all fit in there. So we have what we call a travel pool. Maybe about 5 reporters, newspaper, magazine, television, radio, the Associated Press and Reuters press, a couple of photographers. And we are the travel. We travel with the president, and then we pool what we see when we're with the president in private with the rest of the reporters who were in the school cafeteria waiting for the president to do his big public education speech, which of course never happened. Standing in that room, we have to turn off our cell phones. We did have cell phones by then, funny little Motorola clamshell flip phones that did not take pictures and didn't have great signals, but they got us through. And we did not know about the plane crash. But the president, we saw the president's chief of staff come into the room and lean down and whisper in the president's ear. And you go back and look at the video, you look at the look on George Bush's face. He'd only been president for 8 months, but I'd covered him for years. And I knew that when I looked at his face and I said, this is something bad. I scribbled down in my reporter's notebook, 9:07 a.m. Andy whispers. And Andy Card, the chief of staff, didn't tell us for months later what it was with a chilling economy of words. He whispered to the president, a second plane has hit the second World Trade Center tower. America is under attack. Now, we didn't know that at that moment, but we knew something awful had happened. The president got up, left the room. We went outside and I opened that little cell phone, turned it on, and I called my New York desk, and they were screaming, a plane, a jetliner. We saw it. It went right into the second tower. There's a plane went in the first tower. There are people dying. We saw bodies falling out of the windows from the pictures that were there. So I think in all of the years, the 40 years that I covered 7 presidents across an arc of amazing history, to see the United States being attacked by, at that point, we didn't know who, but it was pretty clear it was terrorism, is the strongest, most, it just goes to every fiber of your nerves in your body. And I will tell you this, the next 10 hours, I stayed with the president. It was my job. We got on the airplane. Others were kicked off. I stayed with him till he went to a bunker under Nebraska. I stayed with him till he got back to the White House. When we got back to the White House and my job as pool reporter was over, and I had phoned in all these pool reports for 10 hours, and I looked at my computer when I got back to the White House, and the first email was from my 2 college sons at Vanderbilt University. And the email said, Mom, our fraternity brother, Ted Adderley, was on the 93rd floor of the first tower. A young man I had known and seen weeks before, right in the spot, right under where the plane hit. And that was the moment that I sat down and I cried. Thank you for asking, Jordan.
Yeah, that I was really intrigued by, and that kind of goes up into my follow-up question. You said that you were the one that was actually with President Bush, and so on the plane ride, and you said in the bunker, and I want to know what stood out to you on that plane ride. What were your personal, you went a little bit on your personal emotions, but just knowing on that plane ride initially, and you didn't know, how was that?
It struck me that we, with the President of the United States, knew so little about what was happening on the ground. Anybody, you all are too young, but people like Professor Russell, back in Washington or Texas, he knew the lay of the land. So he would look at all those news reports that we couldn't see. And everybody on the ground, your parents, your neighbors, all knew far more than we did. Who was the most frustrated that day? The President of the United States. He had 3 secure phone lines, but we went up way high in altitude so that Air Force One would be kept safe. We didn't know if other planes were going to try to hit Air Force One. So as he went higher and higher, his phone lines gave out. And George Bush argued with his chief of staff, the head of the Secret Service, and with the pilot of Air Force One, who was the captain is the ultimate decider. George Bush said, I want to go back to Washington. And all 3 of them said, no, it's not safe for you. Our job is to keep you safe. That's why we went to Nebraska. The president later told a documentary, I recommend it to you, on the History Channel. It's about what happened on Air Force One that day. And at one point, President Bush tells the interviewers years later, I knew I had to address the American people, and I was damned if I was going to do it from a bunker under Nebraska. So we did go home to Washington and he spoke there.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jordan. I appreciate it.
Gordon, thank you. Best of luck to you.
Next up, we have Joseph Taylor.
Hi, Mrs. Compton. How are you?
Hi, Joseph. Nice to meet you.
Good. Okay, so my question today is, you covered 7 different presidential administrations, starting with the Gerald Ford. How has the White House press room and coverage changed since that time?
Oh, dramatically. And it's changed in 2 ways. Technically, how the 20th century television and newspaper coverage went. Again, we didn't have a lot of live broadcasting. We had very scheduled days where we had time to work, time to publish our stories. And then after the evening news, we went home again. And the presidents and the White House operation dealt with us on a kind of a 9-to-5 basis when they could. Now that we have given, I'm trying to think where my phone is, we have now given every human being who has his or her hands on a smartphone, and actually some Russian bots as well, the power to see something happen, to record it, to speak about it, and with one touch to publish on the internet. So now we live in a world of instant communication. And here's what it's done, Joseph. And this is something that breaks my heart, because I love journalism and I'm proud of of all we do and what we still do. But in a country now with so many places for people to get their news, with so many choices of cable networks or internet sites or newspapers or television stations, people have begun to float and drift into their own political comfort zone and hear the news they want to hear. And what has that done to our political system? It has made this the most divided, most hostile, most toxic environment for politics that I've ever seen in my career. And I that's a real negative. And I don't know how the country is going to swing back from this bitter divisions where people just look at the same facts, or they look at facts and they choose their own.
Okay.
So I think the biggest change from Gerald Ford, very old style politician, and President Biden, who's a very old style politician, but who lives in a very connected, immediate world, and has to deal with a very divided Congress. The Senate is 50-50. The House has a very narrow margin. The Supreme Court is very narrowly divided. So so I think journalists have as much responsibility as the politically elected officials to make sure they are telling a full story, faithful to the facts, clear and convincing, and do it with a tone of respect and focus on what is important to the people at home who need to know what their government is doing. I hope that's not too long an answer for a very, very good question.
For my second question, it would be, what was the most emotionally challenging story you reported?
You know, a lot of people think that 9/11 was the absolute, I mean, it can't get any more dramatic than it. And that was dramatic. But I'll give you one that was dramatic in a far different way. When I grew up, grade school, high school, college, the world was divided between the free world, the United States, Western Europe, much, Australia, the free world, the democratic West, which were the big economic powerhouses, and they kind of ruled the world. Mm-hmm. The other side of the planet was communist Russia, communist China. In 1990, in 89 actually, the Berlin Wall fell, and then the Soviet Union began to fall apart. And the most important political day I ever covered was Christmas. I'm a young mom. I have 4 little kids at home and a husband. And I put the turkey in the oven at 5 o'clock in the morning, and the kids got up early and opened their presents. And then I went to the White House lawn. All day long, I reported live when Mikhail Gorbachev, the head of the Communist Party in Russia, but he was a reformer, announced that the Soviet Union was disbanding, that the countries of Eastern and Central Europe, which had been so strangled by Moscow, that they were now going to be free and independent states. And the hammer and sickle flag came down over the Kremlin for the last time. That day, Joseph, our lives, our globe changed. And if you go back in history, when your grandchildren are looking at American history, world history, that day in 1990, Christmas Day, will be the most dramatic demarcation line of anything that happened in the 20th century.
All right.
Wow.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Thank
Joseph,
you.
I should be asking, Joseph, where are you from?
I'm from Dallas, Texas.
From where?
Dallas, Texas.
Okay, I've
Yes.
heard of that. I've heard of that. And I would love to go back and find out where our first question, where Jordan was from. Well, maybe you can find that information for me.
Yes.
Thank you again, Joseph. It's very nice to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Next up, we have Jacob Courtney.
Hi there. Nice to see you.
Hello, nice to meet you and see you. Thank you very much for doing this for the students. So yeah, my first question is, considering your experience as the only journalist aboard Air Force One on 9/11, what responsibilities do journalists have when they are the only journalists reporting on a chaotic and volatile situation?
My job that day was very, very specific. Part of the White House system was, since 100 reporters couldn't be on Air Force One with him, there was one television reporter, one radio, one from each of the wire services, one television CBS camera crew, photographers from each of the wire services. And the only thing I was allowed to do is take notes and phone my information to the rest of the rest of the press corps that had been at the hotel in the morning, would be at the school for the big speech, and then would all get on a press plane. We had a press charter to take them back to Washington. So it was not doing any individual enterprise reporting for myself. The unusual part about 9/11 was that instead of being able to take my phone and call the reporters who were on the ground frantically filing stories and asking the White House aides who were with them what's going on. Of course, nobody knew the answer to that. I couldn't get to reach any of them. So the best way to make my pool reports, not just to the reporters who were traveling with the president, but the entire White House press corps, the entire networks, all newspapers, watching these live broadcasts from Ground Zero. I would take my little flip phone and I would dial into ABC News and I would dictate a pool report for the desk to write up and send out by fax or email. The other thing I would do, they would put me live on the air with the ABC network anchor, Peter Jennings, who was for 20 plus years, was ABC's senior anchor, an international reporter, a skilled anchor. And so he would interview me. Annie, he'd say, "What are you doing in Nebraska?" I said, "Well, the president's going into a bunker and he's holding a National Security Council meeting." So I did a broadcast to Peter, but it was in my head to every American, to every press reporter, to every news organization. I filled it with the kind of detail and the color and the sense of what the president was feeling, how frustrated he was that he couldn't get back to Washington. And I pulled all of that together. And I did one thing more, because I'm a broadcaster. I've never been a print journalist. I knew that the tone of my voice and the pace at which I spoke would reflect what I was seeing around me. And the White House was very cool and was very controlled. And there were not people running around pulling their hair out. So I knew that my delivery and the words I chose had to be carefully done, because I was now reflecting not just in the details I was giving, but in the tenor that I was taking was part of that pool report as well. So that's what I did that day. It was not reporting for Ann Compton or just ABC News. I was there representing every reporter in the Washington Press Corps and every newsroom across the country.
Wow. It's good that you like did it so especially in such a like raw time to be able to like keep composure and like choose those words and know which ones to say.
And that comes from, can I tell you, that comes from experience. The night before, on September 10th, White House Chief of Staff Andy Card stopped by. A couple of us reporters were sitting together. And I said, Andy, tonight marks 25 years for me as a ABC News correspondent. I started on September 10th, 25 years earlier. So on that day, I had seen crises, I'd seen political battles, I'd seen wars like the Persian Gulf conflict, but I knew what my job was that day. And I think the only way you can train your mind to pick the right words and keep your focus right is to do it and do it over and over. And I had the benefit of having 25 years doing it, which is why I think the next day, Andy Card kicked all the other reporters, except for the Associated Press reporter, all the other reporters off of Air Force One and left them sitting at an Air Force base. And I and the Associated Press reporter and the CBS camera crew were allowed to continue traveling with the president for the rest of the 10 hours.
Well, thank you for answering my question.
Thank you very much. Jacob, where are you from?
The Woodlands, Texas.
Very
mostly.
good. My brother-in-law and sister-in-law are there.
Oh, wow. What part? Like,
I don't know the Woodlands well enough.
okay.
You get off the big highway and you drive a bit.
That's most of the Woodlands.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob.
Next up, we have Peyton.
Hi. My name is Peyton, or PJ is what I go by. It's lovely to meet you, by the way. I know that basically everyone else has said it, but thank you for being here. So I hope it hasn't lost its meaning.
Thank you.
But I wanted to ask you, because I know that as a woman, you've had a lot of firsts in your career. So I wanted to know, especially, what were your thoughts and emotions when you became the first woman assigned to cover the White House for Broadcast News Network?
Well, thank you for asking that. I used to be asked that a lot. And now look at how many women there are.
Yeah.
And what we are reporting in 2021 is, whoa, the first woman vice president, or 3 women on the Supreme Court. So we are moving into a time when, well, I was thrilled to get the assignment. I was very young. I was 27 years old. I did not have a lot of experience. But there are a couple of other things I did, I think, that I'm also very proud of. As a reporter, and again, I covered the White House over that arc of 40 years, and I covered the White House, and then in campaign years, I would very often go off on a campaign. I covered the Hillary Clinton and then the Barack Obama campaign because George W. Bush had his 2 terms. He wasn't campaigning, so I left the White House and went out on the campaigns. I also did something else. I had covered the White House for about 5 years when I met this handsome Texan, and he was a doctor.
Those handsome Texans.
Yes. And I met him here in Washington just before he was going back, and he was actually a professor at University of Texas Medical Branch at Galveston. He was a doctor and teaching there. And we met on a street corner in Georgetown, not far from where I was living, right near Dan Rather. And he struck up a conversation on a Saturday afternoon, and he recognized me, and we chatted for 15 minutes. And I went home and I called my best friend and I said, I just met the man I want to marry. I had just turned 31, and I knew that I had not met him before. So not only was I a White House correspondent, but I took a whole weekend off to get married 7 months later. And then during the 1980 campaign, where I was covering Jimmy Carter. Well, Jimmy Carter was campaigning for re-election, and lost that year. Ronald Reagan was a challenger and he won. I was covering the third party candidate. That's the first year we had a really big third party candidate, John Anderson. But I also had a baby between the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary. Is that the worst timing ever for a mother? On the Sunday between the caucuses the week before and the New Hampshire primary on Tuesday, I'm in labor with a baby boy. And then by election night, as I stood with John Anderson, the third party candidate who got a lot of votes, but he did not win, I was back in maternity clothes with number 2. And then I covered the Ronald Reagan inaugural and went back into the White House. And it was a fun time, but he did a lot of traveling, but he had a very slow pace. So I had a baby girl while I was covering the White House. And then ABC sent me to Capitol Hill for a couple of years. And that was so easy. You know, they come to work in the Capitol on Tuesday morning and go home on Thursday. But I had another baby. So I had 4 kids in 5 years and still covered the campaigns and the presidency. And my kids grew up thinking the president was really cool because they thought he landed the helicopter. So there are lots of firsts that women can do beyond simply getting the job. Now, I have a question for you, if you don't mind, Peyton. Do you think we should still say the first woman astronaut to walk on the moon, or the first woman firefighter to be fire chief? All those are important landmarks, but there are now so many women who have moved up. Minorities are lagging. The first woman of color as a vice president. The first, there are all sorts of other categories, but I'm wondering do you think we should ever get to the day where the first woman just isn't going to ring true anymore? But that doesn't mean it was any less exhilarating to be the first every once in a while.
Yes, yes. I mean, I would love to get to the point where we don't even have to say, you know, first woman this, first woman that. You know, it's a regular thing that, you know, we're successful and, you know, we achieve every goal that anyone else can. And, you know, I hope that one day, kind of what you were saying, that it's not a huge deal anymore. You know, I mean, we've come so far, and I think I see sometimes how women are treated, especially in, you know, not just the media, but, you know, in everyday life. And, you know, so I'm just hoping that we can get past all of that and we can.
I agree with you. In fact, when we say that, oh, that's the first woman firefighter, the presumption of the story is, whoever thought a woman could do that?
Yes, yes, exactly.
I think in your professional lifetime, we will climb past it. May I ask where you're from?
Houston. I'm from Houston, Texas.
Great.
Yes, ma'am. Third ward. Yeah, but I guess piggybacking off of that, you know, I guess as a woman, even if you are qualified and fully equipped for a job, you can't be taken seriously. I'm just wondering, as a young woman in the media, how do you best respond to that? You know, I guess we kind of answered that question before, but.
But you've asked it in a very, very important way. What did I do to come past that?
Yes, ma'am.
I was acutely aware when I first started at local news. I was the local Roanoke station for 4 years. And people would call the station and say, why do you have this woman, this girl? I was 22 years old, anchoring the 11 o'clock news. And I could understand that they didn't look at me as being an authoritative figure. So what I did was made sure that everything I did in front of the camera and in public was measured, professional, not giggly, not girly. I didn't wear bows in my hair. I tried to dress. I've long thought that women on television should dress so that it complements them, but it doesn't take away. When you're listening to television reporters or anchors, you want to look in their eyes and listen to what they're saying. You shouldn't have to worry about their dangly earrings or what is that necklace she's got on, or for a man, what in the world did he think putting that tie on this morning. So I think I have tried in public to comport myself in a way that invited respect. And I think that's what women governors do, even when they're fighting with a legislature who doesn't take them seriously. I think it's what women who are right now being interviewed and voted on in Congress for cabinet positions, they have to remain as professional and as straightforward and as, again, professional as anyone else, and that eventually that will change. One thing that they can never change: you and I dress differently than most of the men on television. And we wear our hair different ways. Hillary Clinton got so tired of people talking about her hair. But let's face it, what's the first thing you saw on me when the camera opened up? Her hair's falling in her eyes and she's wearing pink. I mean, you can't escape the cosmetic effects of being a woman, especially in broadcasting.
You're right. You are 100% right. And I love that answer. It's exactly what I was looking for. So it's a little bit personal. I know it's not a technical question, but something that's been on my mind, especially as I enter the workforce. So,
well, thank you so much.
Thank you for speaking to me.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Bastian.
Hi, Bastian.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Thank you for being here today.
You.
So my first question is, and you kind of just talked about it, you said before that being so young, or never mind, sorry. You said before that being so young during your early years at ABC made things daunting. Do you think having big obstacles like that push you to rise above the rest?
That's a good question, and it has not been asked that way before. I think it always kept me on my toes. I never felt I had a free pass. I never felt kind of a blush of celebrity, but well, I can coast through this because people think TV correspondents are pretty cool, and so yes, I think it did motivate me to work as hard, and especially I had to study government, study recent presidential politics. I had to study, why does a president always have to give the State of the Union address in January? I had to learn so much of the infrastructure of the presidency that I felt like I was working twice as hard. The age thing was really important too, because I knew I had such less life experience. I'd never had a big, high-paying job to knowing how to, handle my taxes. I bought a house before I got married, so I kind of learned how to deal, with finance and living in a community. I had to buy my first car, so there's all sorts of life lessons that you learn. That anybody in any profession learns. And I think because all of that was happening at once, plus I was watching American history, unfold right in front of my eyes, that it was a time of personal growth. And I think you are absolutely right in your question. I think it did inspire me to work even harder and to find the best path forward, because time is short. And you don't have more than 24 hours in a day. I've never found out how to get more than 24 hours in a single day. Good question.
Well, that's awesome. I think that's good for us to hear as young people going into the workforce, that that pushes you harder. So my second question is, what was your favorite presidential administration to cover and why?
I love this question, and I get it all the time. And I never answer it.
Oh.
As a reporter, I have for 50 years now, always tried to be even-handed. Reporter, I have no personal permission to like one president more than another, to judge a president's policies, saying that tax hike is terrible, that troop withdrawal is just the right thing. I have to look at all of the facts about a president, about his administration, and hold it very evenly. I will tell you that there is for me my favorite time to cover a president and the worst time to cover a president. And I hope this will be a satisfactory answer for you. The best time to cover a president is when there is a change of administration, whether it is defeating an incumbent or following a president who's had his or her 2 terms, and you get a whole new crew in. It's a new cast of characters, of new ideas, new policies. There's a new energy. Those months in a new presidency, not really a honeymoon, but those early months are a time of action, and reporters like to cover action. So I love the early months of any new presidency, either party, anywhere on the political spectrum, any circumstances that got them into office. The worst time to cover a president is a time of personal scandal. Many of those stories are ugly. They should never have happened. I do remember in the first 2 years of President Clinton's second term, where he was accused, investigated, lied to federal prosecutors. He was impeached. He was not convicted. He was acquitted of the impeachment charges. So he was not removed from office. But, and it had to do with an intern. We had interns at ABC all the time, and we treated them like treasures, as solid gold. We wanted them to see the best of what we did and how we did. We wanted to inspire them with our journalism. And so I think whenever there's a personal scandal involving a president, a high-ranking political official, where there's scandal or malfeasance, criminal activity, I find that the hardest time to cover, because it takes the nation's attention off of what's really important. Our families, our communities, our pocketbooks, our economy, our schools, our racial relations and racial justice. So when we do cover scandal and criminal activity, it takes our journalistic eyes off of what is far more important to the American people.
Right.
Is that an answer?
That's a great answer. It's a different question, but that's actually better than I was looking for. I can see how the focusing on like the drama of that and seeing them as like celebrities almost is like, it's not what really impacts us as the people.
Absolutely
And so,
right. Absolutely right.
but that's interesting that the most fun time is when it switches, and that's I'm sure you get
Action,
right.
New ideas.
You get a little not complacent, but tired of the same old when it reaches time.
I tell you, there was a time maybe in the 2 to 3 years before I actually retired, when I decided, I've had a wonderful run, but every January is a State of the Union address. Every February, a president has to put out his budget. There's a pattern and a rhythm. And of course, how dysfunctional Congress had become, how it was so difficult for any president to get anything done. So I think I had a weariness about our political system that had really just wasn't functioning as well as I think it was during I was there for part of the 70s, but the 1980s and 90s, where policy, there are big issues like immigration reform in 1986, tax reform in 1980 was huge. And that affected every single American. And to see the Republicans and the Democrats in the House and in the Senate get together and then come together, the 2 chambers, and pass those things, that was rewarding.
Yeah, it seems like it. If you stick with it for that long and it's that big of a thing, that sounds great. It sounds like a great experience.
Can I ask, Bastian, where you're from?
I'm from Bozeman, Montana.
No kidding. I have a brother in Helena. Yeah.
Oh, nice. I love Helena. It's beautiful up there.
It is just gorgeous. It is just gorgeous. We'll never get him back on the East Coast, ever.
Well, thank you so much again for being here. It's an honor.
Thanks very much, and best of luck to you. Thank you for your questions.
Thanks, Bastian. Next up, we have Tristan.
Well, first off, it's an honor. I like the moment that I heard your voice and saw your name, I was so excited. I know your voice, if that sounds kind of weird.
No, I still get that. Flight attendant, especially, say, "Oh, it's you."
So I guess to jump into it, so in the 2016 election, I read that you briefly came out of retirement. What made you come out of retirement for that election?
Money. No, I'm kidding.
I was like, all right, good. She's honest.
Not money. When in 2014, my husband and I this is a house where I've lived for 40 years next month. 40 years, raised 4 kids in this house. All my kids were going off to college or working. My husband was still practicing medicine. He was an internist here in Washington. And one day he said, 40 years is enough, Ann. You don't need to keep doing this. And it was time, there's so many young reporters coming along at ABC News. And, there were a lot of us old folks still hanging on to the top jobs. And something in me just clicked. I said, this is good time to walk away. President Obama was heading into the last 2 years of his administration. So I went and I told ABC News that my contract would be up later in the year, and I would like to, my boss said, well, we're going to give you a new contract. I said, I won't sign it. It's time for me to retire. Now, I didn't know quite what that was going to mean for me, but I did know the everyday routine of walking in and out of the Northwest Gate. But they did let me pick when I wanted to retire, and I chose September 10th, 2014, the day that marked 41 years as an ABC News correspondent. And that was kind of perfect symmetry for me. I covered Hillary Clinton in 2008, all through the primaries, as her candidate was an absolute sure bet until it wasn't. And when she finally lost the nomination to Barack Obama, I got onto the Barack Obama plane and I covered him all the way into the White House, and I covered the first 6 years of his administration. So when we got to 2016, ABC News said, well, would you come back as kind of a commentator? Now, I've always been a reporter, and I don't believe I should be a commentator or an analyst. My job is facts, putting them together, putting them out to the public. I don't want to give you my opinions on things. But I thought that it might be fun because here now Hillary Clinton was going to be the nominee, and I'd covered her for 25 years at that point. We grew up, 2 girls in towns near each other in suburban Chicago, both applied to Wellesley. She got in, I didn't. I went to Hollins instead. We both married Bills who went to Yale, and we both had children within a month of each other. Wow. So to see Hillary Clinton finally get the nomination, I would do that. And then I covered the Trump convention as well. But I did it just kind of I was down on the floor as a floor reporter for most of the evening, and then I'd go up for the last hour or so and do kind of historical commentary about, this isn't the way party, or Hillary Clinton, look at all the Bernie Sanders delegates who are standing up, turning their back to her. And I could talk a little bit. Oh, and could I get interviews? I'm standing over near the Illinois delegation, and somebody grabs my hand and yanks hard. It's Jesse Jackson. I'd covered him for 30 years. And he's a wonderful interview, and he's an iconic civil rights leader. Mm-hmm. So he grabbed me and asked for an interview.
Oh, wow.
and Vice President Mondale was up in the Minnesota delegation. I had just been standing there. I didn't see him. I came up to the booth, and another correspondent on the floor was interviewing him. And they said, well, wait, Ann Compton's up there. So he put on the headset, and he and I, we've known each other for years. And I was able to interview. So it was a fun way for me to kind of have one last curtain call. But I really think now I'm so far out of the loop. I don't cover the campaigns on a daily basis. I loved campaigns. You became the world's expert in that campaign. And I miss the excitement and the travel. But I was glad to finally put an end to that. And I have been very lucky to have invitations to come. I came down to Sam Houston to speak. I've gone to universities and colleges all over the country. Organizations, nonprofits, business groups, financial groups, healthcare organizations have invited me to come to their big conventions and to talk about presidents and politics. Again, not taking sides. So I've had a chance to make that my kind of retirement career, and I do enjoy that.
That's awesome. So how was it, or like how weird was it to go from doing these 4 decades of just fact-based news reporting and then going and jumping into more biased or more opinionated, I should say, news reporting on air?
Yeah, well, I again, the opinions I was giving were my historical perspective. It was still never taking sides between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, or between the Trump movement in the party, in the Republican Party, and the establishment party. Many of the Republicans I covered for years didn't want to go to Trump's convention, stayed home. So I didn't take that kind of perspective on taking sides, but to put it in perspective for people who were seeing really one of the most unusual elections we had ever seen. And of course, then you get to election night, even more so. So the opportunity to look back and take a historical measure of the presidency has been very rewarding. I'm on the board of the Miller Center at the University of Virginia. It's a presidential think tank. And they interview presidents and their staffs at oral histories after a president leaves office. And we do lots of presidential scholarship. So that's been a wonderful outlet for me too. The other thing that has changed, that the way correspondents get on the air now, so much of it is digital, so much it is either live streaming events. It isn't the old style quick spots and stand-ups and things that I was used to. And I think there's a new generation which is really probably better than I am at multitasking and the digital demands that it takes. And they still call me every once in a while for advice.
There you go. Well, thank you so much.
Kristen, where are you from, may I ask?
So I am originally from Cypress, Texas, which is a little south of the Woodlands.
Okay. And that's where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up there. My parents are born and raised in San Antonio, and right now they moved back to be closer to family again. So okay. That's why it's kind of a weird question.
Well, great. Thanks. Thanks very much. And thank you for the questions, Tristan. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tristan. Next up, we have Jordan.
Hello, Jordan.
Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you. You've been so captivating listening to all of your stories and your successful career thus far. My first question for you is, of the 7 presidents that you've had the privilege of covering, who do you feel like was the most authentic to the American people?
Now, I do answer this question because it doesn't involve me taking sides. I do think reporters, while we are not entitled to have opinions on issues, we can stand up to defend freedom of the press, the freedom of people's right to know. So I will grade presidents on how accessible they are. And one of the most accessible was President Ford, Gerald Ford, who had spent his entire life in Congress. He wasn't afraid of the press. He knew all the press. He was very open. We saw him all the time. Ronald Reagan, you forget, became president. He didn't really know, and Jimmy Carter was quite accessible too for the early part of his administration. And then he instituted press conferences every 2 weeks at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He said, press conferences are part of my job. I've got to do it. So I like that kind of access, and his staff was very accessible. Ronald Reagan was an outsider, came in from California. He was a national big name, but he didn't know Washington at all. And people forget he was shot and almost killed on day 62 of his presidency. He had just gotten there. So we went through about a year when Ronald Reagan didn't see us a lot. He was recuperating, but he did lots of news conferences. He established a Saturday radio address, which gave him another opportunity to speak his mind. And his staff was very accessible and very open about the policies that they were pushing. I think, again, times of scandal in any administration, presidents and their officials tend to clam up. I saw a great deal of President George Herbert Walker Bush, and he got one term. And he was very open, and always we'd come into the Oval Office to get a picture of him meeting with somebody. He says, "Now I'm not going to take questions," and then he'd take 4. So I give them good marks for doing that. There are times, there's one development for presidents, to some extent, President George W. Bush, but certainly for President Obama. Again, we've given people, politicians now, the ability to reach straight through to the American people on Twitter, on YouTube, on the internet. And President Obama's administration was the first one that really kind of didn't feel it needed the press. And it closed more and more events that the president did. And they would simply issue a video press release. And I had been president of the White House Correspondents Association, and I urged ABC and others, don't use the video handouts. The president wants to be seen with these girl basketball players, but if they won't let you bring your own cameras in, we shouldn't do it. So that's a criticism of the age as much as it is of the Obama staff. They actually took behind the scenes videos of him. He was the first president to have his own videographer. And they would do a 5-minute newscast every Friday morning at 10 o'clock called West Wing Week. And it was voiced by his deputy press secretary. And I can promise you that all the stories reported and all the little sound bites you heard of the president and the people he was meeting with are things that were very complimentary to the president. Did not touch controversy at all. It didn't really hold the president to account on things. So it clearly was not a newscast. But I think in the digital age, unfortunately, Jordan, that too many public leaders, not only presidents, but members of Congress and political candidates are able to ignore the press and ignore public questions and simply dish up their own video and their own product to voters, thinking they don't need to go through the filter of journalistic ethics.
That's very interesting. I've never thought about, technology being a cause behind the lack of authenticity with our president. So that was a very interesting take.
Great.
Thank you. I also have a question. So this past year was crazy, as we all know. Very, very crazy. How reliable do you feel like the media was in portraying the recent events in our country?
I'm sad to say that the media did not always stand up with the best practices. And let me now describe, there are 2 universes. When I say the media, I usually mean the mainstream media, the television networks, the major newspapers, the people who are trained journalists who run independent newsrooms, and they are out there to put out fact. In the digital age, there are now, there's also a media landscape that is much broader than that. And some Americans can't tell the difference between what's a news report and what's a polemic and what's an opinionated group of commentators who are saying, well, this is our version of the truth. And I think in the last 4 years, it became even more exaggerated when even the president and even the president's spokesman would say things that we knew were absolutely untrue and certainly had to do with COVID as well. To see some of that information distorted. And I'll give you, if I could, I'll give you one line, because I tell this to every audience that asks me questions along this line. When a press reports something that turns out to be wrong, the clarification has to be immediate, crystal clear, and very out there and very understandable. When politicians see something that they know is true, they don't want it to be true, so they call it fake news, that's unacceptable. And as much as I don't think journalists should be judging politicians, when untruths are spoken over and over and over again, the press has been put, the mainstream press has been put in the position of having to blow the whistle. And I take no pleasure from that. I don't think that's the role we should have. But when lies are told, our job is to make sure the truth is available to the American people. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am. Of course it does. I hope that all of us on here can go into our future careers and take that advice with us and lead other reporters in being honest.
And well, I have every faith that you will, because there is a huge universe of really good reporters, newsrooms, editors, journalists, writers, producers who really, and podcasters who really do an excellent job of putting it out there. But it's a very crowded, noisy universe in the media landscape. And I hope that Americans can value when they find somebody who is telling it accurately. And may I ask where you're from?
Yes, of course. I'm from Montgomery, Texas, just a little north of Houston.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you, Jordan. Next, we have Jessa.
Hello.
Hello, Jessa.
How are you?
Good.
I just want to say I've enjoyed listening to you speak. Like, all your stories are so interesting.
Thank you.
So I've really enjoyed this time with you.
Thank you.
My first question is, you said at the beginning of like the session that that you didn't really know what you wanted to do, I guess, going into college. So why did you pursue a career in journalism? And like, what skills did you develop to become successful?
Well, that's a terrific question. And it really was. I had not one day of journalism class. There was no major communications major at Hollins back then. And I think I still, even after now all 4 of my children have completed their college educations, all of them sought broad liberal arts education. And I think that the skills to read and to write well, the skills to listen, to work collaboratively, the skills to know how to research, the skills to question what you see that you don't think is right, and to know when you need to know more. All of those are skills that could go to any occupation. My oldest son's a lawyer, and he in fact was just ended his job at the Department of Justice as an Associate Deputy Attorney General. My second son, the science guy, is in Texas. He's in Austin, and he wanted to invent the next, well, he said, Mom, you'd call it a microchip, but it's an integrated circuit. So he moved to Austin, couldn't get a job with any of the big chip makers. So he started a company, and there he is, years later, married and a beautiful little daughter, and a company that he's so busy every day that he can't even talk to me on the phone and fix my computer. And he was an electrical engineering major, but also at Vanderbilt got a very broad, eclectic view. I always told my kids, take music, take art, take history, take sociology, take I took a lot of psychology. We had a very strong department of psychology in college, and all of that gave me kind of tools and an interest that I could apply to any job that I wanted. And again, the golden key for me finding journalism was an internship my junior year in the month of January. And that 1 month, and then the station's willingness to offer me, I didn't apply to a job, the station's willingness to reach out and try to hire their first woman was where the magic key turned in the lock.
I actually formulated a different question while listening to you. So you actually kind of touched on that. You said that your internship was kind of like your golden ticket into your career. So what would be your advice to us or to someone like me who is starting to look into those opportunities?
Well,
of finding an internship.
I have a couple of suggestions, because the world that you are coming out, you're finishing college and going out into the world, and the opportunity to do further education if you choose to. I did not. I started reporting and did not seek any advanced degrees. The world is the world was much more ordered and routine. When I started in journalism, the idea was you worked at a local station for about 7 years, and then maybe you move to a much bigger market, and then maybe 10 years or so you could look for a job at the network. Well, because I was a woman, I got that first job, worked 4 years, network calls, and I'm standing on the White House lawn 5 years after graduating from college. The thing that's changed for all of you, there is surely still ladders to climb in big companies. There are opportunities in journalism. What's different now is there are so many different forms of journalism. There's so many different ways to wade into it that you have a much harder job than I did. You have to figure out, can I make a living off of working for this company, small company that's doing podcasts? How do I get a job at a big newspaper when it's a union shop? You have to belong to the Writers Guild to work there, and the gopher jobs don't look like ripping wire copy and getting coffee. Don't look like they're going to be very very productive, and certainly not make you much money when you first start out. There are a couple of things you can do. Internships while you're still in college or just out of college, because that gives you a professional credential to hang on your sleeve. Second thing is, if you have a special skill. One young fellow who came into ABC News just as a gopher had a law degree. And suddenly producers realized, oh, we could use him. He could help guide us on what can we do about this? What can we, what's the best way to go after this story? So he rose very fast through the ranks. If you speak a foreign language, if you've lived overseas, if you have a particular talent in art or music, those are all part of your portfolio, and make use of them and see if those don't also help you open doors. Because what's hard for you now is to go out into the journalistic world and figure out where, out of millions of different options, you can find the best first step and then the best next step. So it's hard. The last thing is, keep in touch with everybody you've ever crossed paths with at the college level and in internships and professionals, because now we live in a world where you can have emails and cell phones, and you can keep track of you, and of course Facebook and things like that. You can keep track of people, and believe me, those of us who are professionals are more than happy to answer emails, phone calls, give advice. I must have at least 20, mostly young women, who keep in touch with me all the time saying, oh, I just got this new job. One of them was a wonderful young woman I knew when she was finishing Georgetown University here. Her name is Nora O'Donnell. She's now the anchor of the CBS Evening News.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much. I feel like that was a really helpful insight for me. So thank you so much.
Next up, we have Briselli.
Hello, my name is
And I can hear you perfectly now.
Thank you. Your voice is honestly so soothing. I know everybody's told you. Okay. And my first question is, in what way has the coverage of presidential debates changed since your career began?
I was on 2 debates. Did you know that?
Yes.
I was on 2, and these aren't the early primary debates where there's 17 candidates and just one news organization. This is the formal, official presidential debate commission, which is made up of Republicans and Democrats, and it has a professional staff, and they negotiate on an even-handed basis. The biggest difference is that the 2 debates that I did, I was on the last debate in 1988 and the first debate in 1992. And the reason the way I think debates have changed the most, both of those were the old format. There was a moderator, a journalist moderator, who would say good evening, introduce everybody, would get to ask the first question, but then basically was a timekeeper to make sure that the candidate only answered for 2 minutes. And then the response was 30 seconds, and who came next. And then there were 3 journalists who could ask any questions they want. Nobody writes the questions for you. You're on your own. The first debate I did was with George Herbert Walker Bush, who was vice president at the time, and Michael Dukakis, the Democratic governor of Massachusetts, who was the Democratic contender. And it was a very normal debate, and we went through 90 minutes of it. The only thing unusual about that debate, all the questioners were women, and the moderator was a man. Not sure how that happened, but it also meant that all of us had to be careful what we were wearing because we didn't want to clash with the suit sitting next to us. The second debate I did was unusual because it had 3 candidates. President George Herbert Walker Bush, the Democratic challenger, a guy named Bill Clinton, governor of Arkansas, and there was a third-party candidate. The first time a third-party candidate had been included in that, and he was Texas Ross Perot. And he was a businessman. He had not been a politician. He was a big name nationally. And he talked with that Texas twang and had lots of stories, saying it. He was sure the last buggy whip company that was in business was the best one, but businesses have got to go. If they're outmoded, let them go. He was fascinating. So that debate meant that we had to parcel our questions to 3 candidates, and we had to keep the pace up pretty much. Now I think the most effective kind of debate is the town hall format. We are skilled journalists, and we think we know what the American public wants to know. And we also know what these politicians have said and can nail them down on, but wait a minute, you've been out campaigning saying exact opposite. So there's something to be said for a professional journalist being on there. But to have voters who say they really haven't made up their mind yet, to let them come in a controlled, open format and have them be the one to pose the question, I think those are the most significant and the most interesting and the most revealing debates. And those now tend to be more common than the journalists sitting and asking the candidates question. I'd be curious whether you thought the town halls are a good debate format.
I agree, because the journalists don't know what the people are thinking as well. So it's good to hear what people want to ask.
It is good to hear it from the mouth of a voter. And I totally agree with you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then my last question is that you mentioned you had 4 kids during your career, and I know that you received the Mother of the Year award. How did the constant travel for your job affect your family life?
Oh, it was hard. There were, There were so many times, because my schedule was never my schedule.
Mhm.
My schedule was the president's schedule. And if he was going, I remember George Herbert Walker Bush was going to go have his first campaign event of the general election on, or first big event or something, on Halloween. And I saw him in the White House Blue Room. I was covering something and he came in and I said, Mr. President, why are you doing that event on Halloween? I've got 4 kids who need me home. He says, well, Mom, you can take the night off. I give you my permission. I missed birthdays. I tried not to miss parent-teacher conferences. I was married to a doctor who never traveled. I mean, if you're a doctor and you're on the road, you're not working, you're not seeing your patients. So the kids always had a parent home. I had a wonderful housekeeper, an absolute saint who knew a lot more about raising kids than I did. And I had 4 nice, normal, healthy kids, no special challenges, I had them all in one kind of flock. So as they all grew up, we got rid of the high chairs, we got rid of the playpens, we got rid of nap time, and they took care of each other a lot. I think the testament to motherhood was that not one of them went into journalism. I've got the eldest is a lawyer, the next started a company. My daughter worked in business. That's my daughter, who does not know I'm on the air right now. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
My daughter was in business development, but she just had twins and is loving being a stay-at-home mom. I mean, just had them. And then my youngest is, he's a surgeon, a pediatric orthopedic surgeon. Sorry, honey, hi, Ava. I'm on television right now talking to college students in Texas. Can you guys say hi to Ava? Ava is fine. And Ava, can I call you back when you get home?
Well, I'm not really like home yet. I'm going to ballet.
Okay, you're going to ballet.
I'll be there at night.
I'll call you at nighttime. Can you say good night, goodbye to the kids and the students in Texas? This is Ava. Bye.
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 Sweetheart. I always take my kids' calls.
That's sweet.
So did I get close enough to an answer for you?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very good to hear you.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Priscilla. Last but not least, we have Alina.
There you are. Hello, Alina.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
Good.
Patient.
Oh my God, thank you. I've enjoyed all of your answers to all of the questions today. My first question is, in your career, what was the scariest situation in which you found yourself or in which you were the most scared for others' safety? Yeah, sorry.
I've got a real quick story I can tell you about that. I usually think that when I'm traveling with the President of the United States, there is no safer place. Air Force One is a plane that is so well maintained with such an exceptionally talented crew that even in bad weather where the plane's bucking like this, I've never felt scared. I was not scared on 9/11 because I knew the resources being used to protect the President of the United States. I was scared for the people on the ground that day. But there was one case, we had gone with the President of the United States to Panama, a friendly country. There's obviously a huge American presence down there because of the Panama Canal. And actually, President George Bush went down with Barbara Bush, and we were only going to be there for a day or so. And he was going to give an address to a huge, friendly crowd in a city park. And I mean, there were thousands of people in this park, and they were excited to see them. And the president was up on a platform, and then those of us and the reporters who were traveling with him just in the motorcade, there were 5 or 6 of us, right in the little buffer area in front of the stage. And behind us, those bicycle rack kind of fences. And then these people surging and pushing up against it. A block behind the park, there were some protesters. and the police hit the protesters with tear gas, which was picked up by the wind, blown into the park on these thousands of people packed into this, and they started surging forward. The gas got to us, and then it got to President and Mrs. Bush up on stage. Their eyes are watering. The Secret Service finally grabbed they have a protective raincoat that's bulletproof, finally put it around the president and dragged him off the stage, and Mrs. Bush with her. I was scared because I thought we would be hurt by the people behind us who were being hurt up against the barricades. We ran to the motorcade. The president had long since gone. We had to drive around Panama City looking, where's the president? We finally went to the airport and rejoined everybody. But I think that is the closest I ever felt worried. I've been in, presidents don't go in a lot of war zones, but I was in Operation Desert Storm with President Bush in the lead up to the war, out with the troops. And of course, the idea of terrorism anywhere you go now makes all of us feel a little more vulnerable. But I honestly have never met the kind of terror that I'm sure some of my colleagues who have covered combat situations or air disasters or hurricane disasters have felt far more vulnerable than I have ever had to be.
Wow, that's a scary situation. Thank you for the story. My second question, what motivated you to get out of bed and go to work every day?
Oh, money. No. I loved my job. And the way we work it at the White House for a network is you usually have 2 or 3 correspondents assigned to the White House because it's a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week. And I knew that my power as a reporter, my relationship with the White House staff that I was covering, with the public that would be watching me, my strength was being on the air every day. Being on Good Morning America every single morning, no matter what, out in the snow on this North Lawn, off on, travels overseas. Gosh, we would, at every corner of the planet I've been. And I think because I loved the job, and I knew that if I didn't show up for a day, that would hurt me professionally, that it would diminish the strength that I had. So loving the job and knowing that showing up and getting on the air was the key to success. I will tell you the first thing I did when I retired, 2 things. I took off my wristwatch. I do not wear a wristwatch, and I never set an alarm clock. And I used to have to get up at 3:30 in the morning, 5:15 in the morning, be at the White House at about 10 after 6. I do not set an alarm clock anymore.
Okay, thank you for answering my questions. I enjoyed it.
Elena, thank you very much. Where are you from?
Houston.
Okay, great. Well, all of you have had terrific questions. Professor, this has been a real joy. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We owe you a great debt for coming here and talking to the students. I know I enjoyed listening to your stories, and I know they did as well. Is there anything else that you would like to add or anything?
What I'd like to add is that this season of COVID will begin to fade. Tomorrow I get my 2nd shot. I'm so old, I qualify for a shot. The pressure on the kind of divisions, the Zoom and the lack of personal contact, that will begin to fade. But what we're seeing right now is permanent. We will always now make great use of quick technical ability to bring people together. This is a wonderful technology. It is something we will continue to use. We will begin traveling again. We will be able to see each other person to person. But let's take the best of what we've got. Thank God the pandemic came when there was Zoom and there were phone phone communications, so that that we have been able to continue working in many of the fields in this country. There are some, obviously, including small businesses and small restaurants, that have suffered and will not survive the pandemic. But let's find what we can, the best of what we've been able to salvage from this, and the respect and the compassion that we can show for each other is an important tool for any century, any profession, and any community. And I wish each and every one of you good health, stay safe, and email me about what you're doing.
Thank you. So well put. So well put. Well, that's all the time we have with us today. So again, I want to thank you, Anne, one more time for joining us. And please join us next time on Dateline, Democracy and Media. Thanks.